Imagine clocking in for your night shift, only to find the PA system announcing phantom flights to destinations that don't exist anymore. The baggage claim rumbles, but there's no luggage in sight. This isn't just an abandoned terminal. It's a place with terrifying rules, like never look directly at the security monitor's static and always lock the cockpit door, even if a pilot is still inside. Can we survive until dawn? The Albuquerque Regional Terminal had been officially closed for 3 years, but someone still needed to watch it. That someone was me, Daniel Torres, and tonight marked my 7th shift in this godforsaken place. The job posting had been vague, almost deliberately so. Night security position. Minimal supervision. Must be comfortable working alone. What they hadn't mentioned was that the terminal wasn't as empty as it should have been. I pulled into the cracked parking lot at precisely 11:45 p.m., 15 minutes before my shift began. The sodium vapor lights overhead flickered in their death throes, casting pools of sickly yellow across the asphalt. Beyond them, the terminal building loomed like a beached whale, its vast glass windows reflecting nothing but darkness. No plane sat at the gates. No travelers rushed through the doors. The whole structure existed in a state of suspended animation, caught between operational and abandoned, between the living world and something else entirely. The desert wind carried sand against my windshield as I sat in my car, staring at the building. I could already feel the weight of the place pressing against my chest, that familiar sensation of being watched by empty windows. My supervisor, Gerald Hutchins, had given me a manila folder during my first shift. Inside were the rules. 23 of them, typed on yellowed paper that looked decades older than the terminal itself. Some made a twisted kind of sense. Others defied all logic. But Gerald had been clear. Follow every single one, or don't bother coming back. If you came back at all, I checked my phone one last time. No messages from my girlfriend, Amy. She'd stopped asking about my new job after the third night, when I'd come home pale and shaking, unable to explain what I'd seen in Gate C7. The distance between us had grown with each shift, but I couldn't quit. The pay was absurd for a security position, nearly triple what any legitimate company would offer. And there was something else, something I couldn't quite articulate. A morbid fascination, perhaps. Or maybe just the stubborn need to prove I could survive what others couldn't. The previous security guard, a man named Robert Chen, had lasted 2 weeks before vanishing. The company line was that he'd simply stopped showing up, but his car had been found in this very parking lot, driver's door hanging open, keys still in the ignition. The police had investigated, found nothing, and eventually filed it away as a missing person case. Gerald never mentioned him, but I'd found Chen's notes scribbled in the margins of the rulebook. Desperate warnings written in increasingly illegible handwriting. The static sees you back. One note read. They're not recordings, said another. The pilot is already dead. Don't let him out. I grabbed my flashlight and the folder, stepping out into the November chill. New Mexico nights could be brutal, the desert heat fleeing the moment the sun disappeared, leaving behind temperatures that knifed through clothing. My breath misted in the air as I approached the employee entrance, a nondescript metal door on the building's eastern side. The keypad beside it glowed green, the only sign of electricity in the entire complex. My fingers trembled as I punched in the code. The lock disengaged with a heavy clunk that echoed through the empty parking structure. I pulled the door open and was immediately hit by the smell of the terminal. Stale air, old carpet, cleaning chemicals, and underneath it all, something organic and raw, like meat left too long in a warm place. The employee corridor stretched before me, lit by emergency lighting that cast everything in shades of red and shadow. My footsteps echoed off the cinder block walls as I made my way to the security office. The walk took 3 minutes, but it always felt longer, as if the hallway stretched with each step. Painted lines on the floor designated different colored paths, leading to various sections of the terminal. I followed the blue line, as instructed by Rule 1, always use the blue path to reach the security office. Other paths lead to areas that are no longer accessible. I never asked what that meant. I didn't want to know. The security office sat in the terminal's heart, a windowless room filled with monitors, filing cabinets, and a desk that had seen better decades. I flicked on the overhead lights, wincing at the fluorescent buzz that filled the space. 12 monitors lined the wall, each connected to cameras throughout the terminal. Most showed exactly what you'd expect. Empty corridors, abandoned gates, motionless escalators frozen mid-step. But Monitor 7 was different. It had been displaying nothing but static since my first night, a rolling field of black and white snow that occasionally seemed to form shapes within its chaos. Rule 3 was explicit about Monitor 7. Never look directly at the static on Monitor 7 for more than 3 seconds. If you see a face forming, turn away immediately and count backward from 20. Do not resume watching until you reach one. I'd broken that rule once on my second night. I'd stared into the static for maybe 10 seconds, watching as the white noise began to coalesce into features. Eyes first, then a mouth stretched too wide, then the vague impression of a hand pressed against the screen from the inside. The temperature in the office had plummeted, and I'd heard breathing that wasn't my own. I'd followed the counting rule, and the sensation had passed, but I could still feel where that thing's gaze had landed on me. A cold spot on my forehead that occasionally throbbed, especially during the darkest hours of the shift. I set down my thermos of coffee and pulled out the rulebook, laying it open on the desk. I read through them every shift, a ritualistic preparation for the hours ahead. Some rules applied to specific times. Others were constant. Rule 7. If the PA system announces Flight 237 to Roswell, immediately evacuate Gate B12 and do not return until morning. This flight should not exist. Rule 11. The baggage claim will activate at approximately 2:30 a.m. You will hear the carousel running and luggage being moved. Do not investigate. The baggage claim should be empty. Rule 16. Between the hours of 3 and 4 a.m., do not enter the main departures hall. Spectral passengers await flights to destinations beyond our understanding. They do not appreciate interruptions. And the one that chilled me most, Rule 21. If you discover an aircraft at any gate with its cabin door open, proceed to the cockpit immediately. If a pilot is inside, you must lock the cockpit door from the outside. Do not ask questions. Do not make eye contact. The pilot must remain contained until dawn. I checked the timestamp on Monitor 1, 12:07 a.m. The shift had officially begun. For the first hour, everything remained quiet. I made my rounds through the terminal's main concourse, my flashlight beam cutting through darkness that seemed to absorb more light than it reflected. The moving walkways stood silent, their rubber handrails coated in dust. Vending machines lined the walls, still stocked with snacks that had expired years ago. Someone had placed "out of order" signs on all of them, but I knew the truth. They still worked after a fashion. You just didn't want to eat what they dispensed after midnight. Gate A5 caught my attention as I passed. The windows looked out onto the tarmac, where runway lights still glowed in neat parallel lines despite the terminal's abandonment. But tonight, something was different. There were marks on the tarmac, fresh black streaks that looked disturbingly like tire tracks, as if a plane had landed recently, as if something had touched down in the dark while the world wasn't watching. I moved on quickly, not wanting to linger. Rule 4. If you observe any aircraft activity on the tarmac, do not investigate. These flights are not for the living. The public restrooms were another area I dreaded. Rule 9 required me to check them once per shift, but it never specified when. I usually got it over with early, before things got worse. I pushed open the door to the men's room near gate B3, the hinges shrieking in protest. The automatic lights flickered to life, revealing rows of sinks and stalls. Everything looked normal, abandoned but intact, until I noticed the water running in the far sink. I approached slowly, my hand instinctively moving to the pepper spray on my belt. Not that it would do any good against what haunted this place. The water ran clear and cold. The tap turned fully on. I reached out to turn it off, then froze. In the mirror above the sink, I could see the reflection of the stall behind me. The door was closed, but there was a shadow underneath it. The shadow of feet standing motionless on the other side. Rule 13. If you find evidence of recent use in the restrooms, leave immediately. Do not attempt to identify the user. They have already departed. I backed out of the restroom, letting the door swing shut. My heart hammered against my ribs, adrenaline making my hands shake. 7 shifts, and I still wasn't used to this. Maybe Chen had been smarter than I gave him credit for. Maybe leaving was the sane choice. But I couldn't leave. Not just because of the money, but because there was something about surviving this place that felt necessary. Like I was proving something to myself, or to the darkness, or to whatever force had decided that this terminal needed watchers. At 1:15 a.m., the PA system crackled to life. The sound made me jump, even though I'd been expecting it. Static filled the speakers throughout the terminal, that peculiar hiss that preceded all announcements. Then came the voice, feminine and professionally neutral, the same tone used by gate agents everywhere. But this voice carried an undercurrent of something else, something that suggested the speaker wasn't entirely human or wasn't entirely alive. Good evening, passengers. Flight 412 to Phoenix will begin boarding at gate C4 in 15 minutes. Please have your boarding passes ready. I consulted my notes. Flight 412 wasn't one of the forbidden announcements. It was just background noise, the terminal's way of maintaining its delusion of still being operational. I didn't need to respond to this one. But I did need to mark it in the log as per Rule 2. Document all PA announcements. The company requires a complete record, though they will never explain why. I returned to the security office and opened the logbook, a massive leather-bound tome that seemed far too old for a terminal that had only been closed 3 years. Previous entries filled the pages, going back decades. Some in English, others in Spanish, a few in languages I couldn't identify. They all documented the same thing: phantom flights, impossible announcements, hours of darkness punctuated by the pretense of normal airport operations. As I wrote down the Flight 412 announcement, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There was an entry from exactly 1 week ago in handwriting I recognized from the marginal notes. Robert Chen's handwriting. But that was impossible. Chen had disappeared over a month before I started. Yet here was his entry, dated just 7 days ago. Flight 237 announced. Gate B12 evacuated per protocol. Heard screaming from the gate at 2:47 a.m. Did not investigate. They're getting louder. My pen hovered over the page as I tried to process this. Was he still here, hiding somewhere in the terminal, continuing his duties even after officially vanishing? Or was something else writing in his name, maintaining records for an audience that might never read them? The PA system crackled again, pulling me from these thoughts. Attention, all passengers. Flight 237 to Roswell is now ready for boarding at Gate B12. This is a final call for Flight 237. Please proceed to Gate B12 immediately. My stomach dropped. Rule 7. Flight 237 to Roswell. The flight that should not exist. I grabbed my flashlight and ran. Gate B12 was located in the oldest section of the terminal, a wing that had been slated for renovation before the closure. The corridor leading to it was narrower than the modern sections, the ceiling lower, the walls closer. It felt like traveling backward through time, moving from the sterile efficiency of contemporary airport design into something older and more malevolent. My flashlight beam bounced off faded motivational posters encouraging travelers to soar to new heights and discover your destination. The faces in these posters had an odd quality in the dim light, their smiles too wide, their eyes following my movement with an attention that photos shouldn't possess. The gate area came into view, and I stopped dead. There was a plane at Gate B12. This wasn't possible. The company had assured me that no aircraft remained at the terminal, that everything had been relocated when operations ceased. Yet here sat a massive jet, its white fuselage gleaming dully in the emergency lighting. The boarding bridge was extended, connected to the aircraft's door. And that door was open, a rectangle of absolute darkness leading into the plane's interior. But worse than the unexpected aircraft was what I saw through the gate's windows. People, or things shaped like people. Dozens of them standing motionless on the tarmac, arranged in neat lines leading toward the plane. They were too far away and too shadowed for me to make out details, but I could see their silhouettes perfectly still waiting. Waiting to board Flight 237. Rule 7 echoed in my mind. Immediately evacuate Gate B12 and do not return until morning. I turned and walked away, forcing myself to maintain a steady pace despite every instinct screaming at me to run. Behind me, I heard the gate door open with a pneumatic hiss. Footsteps echoed on the jetway floor, steady and numerous. The passengers were boarding. Whatever they were, wherever they were going, the process had begun. I didn't look back. Rule 7 didn't explicitly forbid it, but Chen's notes had been clear. Don't look at the passengers. Once you see their faces, they'll know you, and they'll wait for you. I made it back to the security office at exactly 2 a.m., my shirt soaked with cold sweat. I collapsed into the chair, hands shaking as I logged the Flight 237 announcement. The other monitors showed nothing unusual. Gate B12's camera, Monitor 5, displayed only static now. It had been working fine during my earlier rounds. Coffee. I needed coffee. The thermos sat where I'd left it, still warm. I poured a cup with trembling hands, spilling some on the desk. The hot liquid burned my throat going down, but it helped center me, pulled me back from the edge of panic that threatened to overwhelm my rational mind. At 2:30 a.m. exactly, just as Rule 11 predicted, I heard it. The sound came from the floor below, a deep mechanical rumble that vibrated through the building structure. The baggage claim carousel was running. I could hear the rubber belts sliding over metal rollers, the distinct clatter that suggested luggage being moved and sorted. Heavy items dragging across the belt, the occasional thump as something particularly large dropped onto the carousel. But there was no luggage. There couldn't be. The terminal had been closed for 3 years. I pulled up Monitor 9, which covered the baggage claim area. The view showed exactly what I expected. An empty room with a motionless carousel. Yet I could still hear it running, clear as day. The sound and the visual didn't match. Reality had split along some invisible seam, leaving me caught between what I could see and what I could hear. Something heavy thudded onto the carousel and the audio feed. Then another, and another. A steady procession of invisible luggage circling endlessly, waiting for passengers who would never arrive to claim it. Rule 11's final instruction ran through my head. Do not investigate. The baggage claim should be empty. I turned down the audio feed from that section. The silence that replaced it was almost worse than the sounds had been. At least with the noise, I knew where the wrongness was located. In silence, it could be anywhere. The next hour passed in excruciating slowness. I made another round through the terminal, checking gates and corridors, ensuring nothing had changed from my previous patrol. Everything remained as it should be, which was its own kind of horror. The normalcy felt like a mask, a thin veneer stretched over something writhing and terrible. At 3:15 a.m., I found myself approaching the main departures hall. I knew better. Rule 16 was explicit about avoiding this area between 3 and 4 a.m. But there was something about the prohibition that pulled at me, the same way people are drawn to look at accidents or peer over dangerous edges. What could possibly be in there that required such strict avoidance? The departures hall occupied the terminal's central space, a soaring cathedral of glass and steel where hundreds of seats faced departure boards that no longer updated. I stood at the entrance, one hand on the door, fighting the urge to push it open. Through the narrow window in the door, I could see the empty seats. Row after row of them arranged in neat sections, waiting for travelers who would never come. The departure boards were dark, their digital displays long dead. Everything looked exactly as it should, but I could hear something. A low murmur like distant conversation. And underneath that, music. Old music, the kind that played through airports in the 1960s, orchestral and tinny, as if coming from speakers that predated the terminal itself. A shadow moved across the seats. I jerked back from the window, my heart slamming against my ribs. Had I really seen that? Or was my exhausted mind playing tricks, populating the emptiness with phantoms conjured from stress and fear? The shadow moved again, this time closer to the door. It had a human shape, but the proportions were wrong. Too tall, too thin, moving with a gliding motion that suggested it wasn't actually walking, but floating slightly above the floor. More shadows joined the first. They emerged from the spaces between seats, coalescing from the darkness as if they'd always been there, just invisible until now. They all faced the dark departure boards, standing in patient clusters, waiting for flights that would never be called. Spectral passengers, just as Rule 16 had warned. One of them turned toward the door. Toward me. I couldn't see its face through the small window, couldn't make out any features in the gloom. But I felt its attention land on me like a physical weight, cold and assessing. It began to move toward the door, that same gliding motion, closing the distance with impossible speed. I ran. My footsteps echoed through the empty corridors as I sprinted back toward the security office, not caring about maintaining the calm professionalism the job supposedly required. Behind me, I heard the departure's hall door open, heard that strange gliding sound following me. But there were no footsteps, no breathing, just that awful sliding whisper getting closer. I burst into the security office and slammed the door, engaging the lock with shaking hands. The following sound stopped right outside. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, softly, something scratched at the door. Not like fingers or claws, but like fabric dragging across wood. Like clothing worn by something that had forgotten it no longer needed to breathe or move like the living. The scratching continued for exactly 3 minutes, then stopped. When I finally worked up the courage to check the hallway camera, there was nothing there. Just an empty corridor and a door with 3 long scratch marks gouged into its surface, marks that definitely hadn't been there before my shift started. I updated the log with trembling hands, noting the attempted intrusion. Then I noticed something that made my blood freeze. Monitor 7, the one that always showed static, had changed. The static was still there, but now shapes were moving within it, not random patterns, but deliberate movements. Figures walking through the white noise. And they were all moving in the same direction toward something at the edge of the screen. Toward a door. I forced myself to look away before the 3-second limit expired, counting backward from 20 as the rule instructed. My forehead throbbed where the cold spot had appeared during my first violation. When I reached 1 and looked back, the static had returned to its normal random pattern. But I knew what I'd seen. The things in the static were trying to find a way out, and somehow they knew I was watching them. At 4:30 a.m., my radio crackled to life. I nearly jumped out of my chair. The radio shouldn't work. The terminal's communication system had been deactivated years ago. Yet here it was, spitting static and distortion with something underneath the noise that might have been a voice. Help? Gate C, locked in. The voice was male. Desperate, breaking up between bursts of interference. My training as a security guard demanded I respond to distress calls. But my training in the terminal's rules told me that nothing here was what it seemed. Please, can't breathe. Pilot. The pilot. My mind immediately went to Rule 21. If a pilot is inside, you must lock the cockpit door from the outside. But this transmission was coming from somewhere in the sea gates. Had a pilot somehow gotten free? Or was this a trick, bait designed to lure me into violating one of the rules? The transmission cut out as suddenly as it had begun, leaving only dead air. I stared at the radio, weighing my options. Responding could mean walking into a trap. Ignoring it might mean leaving someone in genuine danger. But after everything I'd experienced in 7 shifts, I had serious doubts that anyone in this terminal was actually alive or in need of conventional help. I checked Monitor 12, which covered these sea gates. Nothing appeared unusual, just empty corridors and dark gate areas. But camera angles were limited. There were plenty of spaces where something could hide. The radio crackled again. Wrong. Shouldn't have opened. It's not. Then silence. I grabbed my flashlight and the pepper spray, though I doubted either would be useful. The walk to the sea gates took 10 minutes, each step an exercise in terror management. The terminal felt different now in these deep hours before dawn. The shadows seemed thicker, more substantial. The air had taken on a quality that made it hard to breathe, as if the atmosphere itself had grown heavier. Gate C7 appeared ahead, and I stopped. This was where I'd seen something during my third shift, something that had left me shaking and unable to explain to Amy what I'd witnessed. I'd been standing exactly where I was now when the gate's boarding door had opened on its own, revealing the jetway beyond. And standing in that jetway, visible only in silhouette, had been a figure in what looked like a pilot's uniform. It had been too tall. Its proportions had been wrong. Limbs too long, head tilted at an angle that would have broken a living person's neck. And it had been staring directly at me, though I couldn't see its eyes in the darkness. I'd run that night too. I seemed to do a lot of running in this job. Tonight, the gate door was closed, but I could see light underneath it, a flickering yellow glow that suggested fire or old incandescent bulbs struggling at the edge of failure. And I could hear something, a low rhythmic sound that might have been breathing. The radio on my belt crackled one more time. Don't open it, please. Keep the door locked. He's still here. The voice was clear now, and I recognized it with a chill that went straight to my bones. I'd heard this voice before, on a recording Gerald had played during my orientation. It was Robert Chen's voice, the security guard who had vanished a month before I started. Chen was still here. Somewhere in this terminal, he was still here, still trying to do his job, still following the rules. Or maybe something was using his voice, puppeting his words to achieve some unknowable goal. I backed away from gate C7, keeping my eyes on that door, watching for any sign of movement. The flickering light underneath grew brighter, then dimmed, then went out completely. The breathing sound stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard something else. Music. The same old-fashioned orchestral music from the departures hall, tinny and distant. But it was growing louder, as if whatever produced it was moving closer. I needed to get back to the security office. I needed to log these events and wait for dawn. Dawn meant safety, meant the terminal's hold on reality loosened enough for me to escape. But as I turned to leave, I heard the one sound I'd been dreading since my first night here. The PA system crackled to life, and the female voice spoke words that made my blood turn to ice. Attention security personnel. An aircraft has been discovered at gate D9 with its cabin door open. Immediate response required. Please proceed to the cockpit and secure all entryways. The pilot must be contained. Rule 21. The most specific, most urgent rule in the entire book. And it was happening now, in the darkest hours of the night, when the terminal was at its most dangerous. I ran toward gate D9, knowing I had no choice, knowing that whatever waited there was exactly what the rules had been written to contain. Behind me, I could hear footsteps that weren't my own, could feel the attention of things I couldn't see focusing on my movement through their domain. The terminal had been waiting for this moment. And now, so was I. Gate D9 sat at the far end of the terminal in a section that had always felt wrong to me. The D concourse was newer than the others, added in a hasty expansion just 5 years before the terminal's closure. But despite its relative youth, it had deteriorated faster than the older sections. The ceiling tiles were water-stained and sagging. The carpet had developed patches of discoloration that looked disturbingly organic. And the temperature was always wrong here, fluctuating between stifling heat and bitter cold without any pattern I could discern. My flashlight beam swept across the corridor as I ran, catching glimpses of the departure boards that lined the walls. They were all dark, as expected, but as I passed, I could have sworn I saw text flickering across them. Destination names that didn't exist on any map. Departure to the between, now boarding for the underneath. Final call for yesterday. I forced myself to focus on the gate ahead. The PA announcement had been clear, and Rule 21 left no room for interpretation. If there was a pilot in that cockpit, I had to lock the door. The rule didn't explain what would happen if I failed. It didn't need to. The urgency in Chen's marginal notes had been enough. The pilot must stay contained. If he gets out, everything ends. Gate D9 came into view, and my worst fears were confirmed. There was indeed an aircraft docked at the gate, its white fuselage pressed against the jetway. The boarding door stood open, exactly as the announcement had stated. But what chilled me was the aircraft itself. I recognized it from my research into the terminal's history. This was Flight 447, a plane that had crashed in the New Mexico desert in 1987, killing all 73 people aboard. The wreckage had been scattered across 20 miles of scrubland. Yet here it sat, whole and gleaming, as if the crash had never happened. The gate door was unlocked. I pulled it open slowly, wincing at the creak of hinges that hadn't been oiled in years. The jetway stretched before me, its accordion walls pressing in from both sides. The fluorescent lights overhead were working, but they flickered in a rhythm that felt almost deliberate, like a heartbeat or a warning signal. Halfway down the jetway, I stopped. I could hear something ahead, not the breathing from earlier, but a sound that was somehow worse. Humming. Someone was humming a tune I didn't recognize. Something old and discordant that set my teeth on edge. The humming was coming from inside the aircraft. I continued forward, my hand gripping the flashlight so tightly my knuckles had gone white. The aircraft's cabin door loomed ahead. That rectangle of darkness I'd seen from the gate now revealed as a threshold into the plane's interior. The humming grew louder as I approached, and I could now make out words within it, though they were in a language I didn't understand. I stepped through the doorway into the cabin. The interior of Flight 447 was exactly as it would have been in 1987. Rows of seats upholstered in brown and orange patterns stretched toward the rear of the aircraft. Overhead compartments hung slightly open, as if passengers had just departed. Reading lights cast small pools of illumination throughout the cabin, though I couldn't imagine what power source kept them functioning. But what stopped me cold was the smell. It wasn't the musty odor of abandonment I'd expected. It was the scent of jet fuel, fresh coffee, and something else. Perfume, cologne. The lingering traces of 73 people who had boarded a plane decades ago and never walked off it alive. The humming came from the front of the aircraft, from the cockpit. I moved down the aisle, my footsteps muffled by carpet that felt too new, too clean. Some of the seats still had items in them. A newspaper dated September 15th, 1987. A paperback novel with a bookmark inserted halfway through. A child-stuffed rabbit, one button eye missing. Personal effects from passengers who had never reached their destination. The cockpit door stood closed, but not locked. I could see light leaking around its edges, a warm yellow glow that seemed to pulse in time with the humming. I reached for the handle, my hand trembling, remembering every word of Rule 21. If a pilot is inside, you must lock the cockpit door from the outside. Do not ask questions. Do not make eye contact. The pilot must remain contained until dawn. The rule didn't say I couldn't look inside first. It only prohibited contact once I'd confirmed the pilot's presence. Maybe that was a loophole. Maybe it was a fatal mistake. But I needed to know what I was dealing with. I pulled the door open. The cockpit was smaller than I'd expected, cramped with instruments and switches that belonged to a bygone era of aviation. 2 seats sat before the controls, both facing the windscreen that looked out onto the dark tarmac. The left seat was empty, but in the right seat, the captain's seat, someone was sitting. He wore a pilot's uniform, though it looked wrong somehow. The fabric was too dark, the insignia unfamiliar. His hands rested on his lap, fingers interlaced in a posture of infinite patience. And he was humming that same discordant tune, his head tilted slightly forward as if studying the dark runway ahead. I couldn't see his face. The angle was wrong, the cabin lighting insufficient. But I could see enough to know that something about his proportions was off, just like the figure I'd seen in the jetway during my 3rd shift. His neck was too long, his shoulders too narrow, his hands possessing too many fingers. He stopped humming. "You're the new one," he said, his voice carrying a strange echo, as if multiple people were speaking in unison. Not Chen. Someone else. Rule 21 was explicit. Do not ask questions. Do not make eye contact. But it said nothing about responding if spoken to. Was silence my safest option? Or would ignoring him constitute a violation of some unwritten rule that would doom me? "I'm Daniel." I heard myself say, the words escaping before I could stop them. "I'm here to secure the cockpit." The pilot's head tilted further forward, and for a horrible moment I thought it would simply keep going, bending at an angle that would snap a human spine. "Secure," he repeated, tasting the word. Yes, that's what Chen tried to do. That's what they all try to do. All? The question slipped out. There have been many night guards over the years. Some followed the rules. Some didn't. Chen was careful, so careful. But even he made mistakes. That's why he's still here, wandering the terminal, trying to finish his shift. My blood ran cold. So Chen was still here, trapped somehow, unable to leave even if he wanted to. Where is he? The pilot's laugh was like wind chimes made of bones. Everywhere and nowhere. He looked at monitor 7 for too long. Let the static pull him in. Now he exists in the spaces between, watching everything, able to help no one. I thought of the radio transmissions, Chen's desperate voice warning me away from gate C7. If what the pilot said was true, then Chen had been trying to protect me, even in his current state. "I need to lock this door now," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "That's the rule." Rules. The pilot said, his tone shifting to something that might have been amusement. Yes, the rules are very important. But do you know why the rules exist, Daniel? Do you know what happens if they're broken? I didn't answer. I was already reaching for the door, preparing to pull it closed and engage the lock from the outside. The pilot's head swiveled, turning to face me with a motion that was entirely wrong. His neck rotated like an owl's, bringing his face into view. I tried to look away, tried to follow the rule about eye contact, but it was too late. I'd already seen. His face was human, or had been once, but time or something else had worn it down, eroded the features until only an approximation remained. His eyes were black holes that seemed to extend forever, and his mouth was stretched in a smile that revealed too many teeth arranged in too many rows. "We're the reason," he said, and his voice was suddenly everywhere, not just from his mouth, but from the walls of the cockpit, from the instruments, from the air itself. "We're what happens when flights go wrong, when planes disappear, when people vanish between departure and arrival. This terminal is a collection point, a place where the lost accumulate. And we need watchers to keep us contained, to keep us from spreading." I stumbled backward, breaking eye contact, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. The pilot laughed again, that bone chime sound that echoed through the aircraft. "Lock the door, Daniel. Follow your rule. Keep me contained until dawn. But know this, every night you survive here, you become more like Chen, more tied to this place. Eventually, you won't be able to leave either. The terminal will claim you, just as it's claimed everyone who's worked the night shift." I grabbed the cockpit door and slammed it shut, my hands shaking so badly I could barely work the lock. The mechanism was old and stiff, but I finally heard it click into place. Through the door, I could hear the pilot humming again, that same disturbing tune, as if our conversation had never happened. I backed away from the cockpit, then turned and ran down the aisle toward the exit. Behind me, I heard the pilot's voice one final time, muffled by the locked door, but still clear enough to understand. "See you tomorrow night, Daniel, if you survive until dawn." I burst from the aircraft into the jetway, gasping for air that suddenly felt too thin. My legs threatened to give out, but I forced myself to keep moving. I had to get back to the security office. I had to document what had happened. I had to make it to dawn. The terminal corridor seemed longer on the return journey, the distance stretching in that way it sometimes did. The walls appeared to lean inward, the ceiling pressing down, as if the building itself was trying to swallow me. I could hear things moving in the darkness beyond my flashlight's reach. Shuffling sounds. Whispers. The gliding motion of the spectral passengers from the departures hall. They were all around me now, drawn by my violation of Rule 21's unspoken component. I'd made eye contact with the pilot. I'd seen his true face. And now everything in the terminal knew what I'd done. Something brushed against my shoulder, a touch like ice and cobwebs. I spun my flashlight, catching nothing but empty air, but I could feel them pressing closer, these things that existed in the terminal shadows. They wanted something from me. Wanted to pull me into their realm, to make me another lost soul wandering the corridors until time itself ended. I ran faster, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The security office was close now, just around the next corner. If I could reach it, if I could lock myself inside, maybe I'd be safe until dawn. Maybe the sunrise would break whatever spell the pilot had cast. The office door appeared ahead, and I lunged for it, grabbing the handle and yanking it open. I threw myself inside and slammed the door behind me, engaging every lock. For a long moment, I stood there, back pressed against the door, listening to the sounds outside. Scratching, tapping, the whisper of fabric against wood. Then, slowly, the sounds faded. I collapsed into the desk chair, my entire body shaking with adrenaline crash. The monitors showed their usual views: empty corridors, abandoned gates, motionless escalators. Monitor 7 still displayed its static, but I was careful to keep my gaze from lingering. 3 seconds maximum. That was the rule. That was the difference between staying in this world and ending up like Chen, trapped between states of existence. The logbook sat open where I'd left it. I picked up my pen and began to write, documenting the aircraft at Gate D9, the encounter with the pilot, the successful securing of the cockpit door. My handwriting was barely legible, shaking across the page, but it would have to do. As I wrote, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There were new entries below mine, written in handwriting I now recognized. Chen's handwriting. But these entries were dated in the future. Tomorrow night. The night after. Dates extending weeks into the future. Chen wasn't just trapped in the past. He was trapped in time itself, experiencing every night shift simultaneously, forever locked in the terminal's endless cycle. And according to his final entry, the one dated 30 nights from now, I would join him. Daniel's last shift, it read, he finally understands. He's one of us now. I slammed the logbook shut, my hands trembling. This couldn't be my future. I wouldn't let it be. I would finish tonight's shift, collect my pay, and never come back. The money wasn't worth this. Nothing was worth this. But even as I made this decision, I felt the pull of the place. The terminal had its hooks in me now, just as the pilot had warned. It would be difficult to leave. Maybe impossible. The clock on the wall showed 5:47 a.m. Dawn was close. Just over an hour until sunrise, until the terminal's grip loosened and I could escape. I could survive that long. I had to. The PA system crackled, and my blood froze. "Attention," said the female voice, and for the first time I detected emotion in it. Anticipation. Flight 616 to the terminal is now boarding at all gates. This is a priority boarding call. All personnel are required to witness the arrival. Please proceed to your nearest gate immediately. Flight 616. I frantically flipped through the rulebook, searching for any mention of this flight number. But there was nothing. Whatever Flight 616 was, it had no protocol, no instructions, no guidelines for how to respond. The lights in the security office began to flicker. The temperature dropped so rapidly that my breath came out in white clouds. On the monitors, I could see movement. All the gates, every single one, had aircraft docked at them now. Planes that hadn't been there moments ago, appearing as if they'd materialized from nothing. And they were all opening their cabin doors. Something emerged from the first aircraft, a shadow too large and too wrong to be human. Then another, and another. They poured from the planes like ants from a disturbed nest, flooding into the terminal, moving with purpose and coordination that suggested intelligence and hunger in equal measure. Monitor 7's static intensified, the white noise forming shapes that pressed against the screen. I could see faces in it now, dozens of them, all screaming silently. Chen's face was among them, twisted in eternal anguish. The office door handle began to turn. I grabbed the flashlight and the pepper spray, backing away from the door, my eyes darting between the monitors and the entrance. The lock held, but I could hear something on the other side. Something large. Something that breathed with a sound like wind through a cave. "Daniel," a voice called from outside. It was the pilot's voice, but deeper now, more resonant. "Flight 616 has arrived. It's time for all of us to board. Time to go where the terminal wants us to go. You've been chosen." "I'm not going anywhere," I shouted back, my voice cracking with fear. "I'm staying here until dawn." The pilot's laugh echoed through the walls. "Dawn? There is no dawn for Flight 616. This flight departs into the dark between moments, and everyone aboard stays aboard. Forever." The handle turned harder, metal grinding against metal. The locks were giving way. Whatever stood outside possessed strength beyond anything human. I looked at the monitors desperately, searching for any escape route. But every corridor showed shadows moving, converging on the security office. They'd surrounded me. There was nowhere to run. Then I saw it. Monitor 12, the one covering the far end of the C gates. There was a door there I'd never noticed before, marked with a sign I couldn't read from this angle. And standing in front of that door, barely visible in the camera's range, was a figure in a security guard uniform. Chen. He was gesturing frantically, pointing at the door, then at the camera. He was trying to tell me something, trying to show me a way out that wasn't in the rulebook. The office door splintered, cracks spreading across its surface. I had seconds at most. I made my decision. I grabbed the rulebook, shoved it into my jacket, and ran for the office's back exit. It led to a maintenance corridor that I'd never fully explored, a narrow passage that the rules had never explicitly addressed. Behind me, the office door exploded inward, and something massive forced its way through. But I was already gone, racing through the maintenance corridor, following an instinct I didn't fully understand. The corridor twisted and turned, leading deeper into the terminal's guts. The walls here were concrete and pipes, the infrastructure that kept the building functioning, or had before the closure. Now the pipes dripped something that wasn't water, and the concrete bore marks that looked disturbingly like claw scratches. I emerged near gate C15, not far from where I'd seen Chen's figure on the monitor. I could see the mysterious door ahead, its sign now visible. Authorized personnel only. Substation access. Chen stood beside it, his form flickering like a bad transmission. Up close, I could see what the static had done to him. His edges were indistinct, bleeding into the air around him. His face phased between expressions, between states of being. But his eyes were focused and urgent. "Open it," he said, his voice layered with that same echo I'd heard from the pilot. "It's the only way. The only place they can't follow." "What is it?" I asked, my hand on the door handle. The space between. Chen replied. "Where the rules break down. Where the terminal's power doesn't reach. I should have gone there on my last night. Instead, I hesitated, and the static claimed me. Don't make my mistake. Behind me, I could hear them coming. The passengers from Flight 616, the pilot, the things from Monitor 7. All converging on this spot, drawn by my presence. I pulled open the door and looked inside. What I saw defied explanation. It wasn't a room or a corridor or anything that should exist within the terminal's structure. It was a space that seemed to fold in on itself, where walls became floors and ceilings became doorways. Light and shadow existed in equal measure, canceling each other out into a gray nothingness that hurt to look at. Go, Chen urged. Before they arrive. And Daniel, if you make it to dawn in there, if you find your way back, don't come back to work. Break the cycle. Be smarter than I was. The sounds of pursuit grew louder. I stepped through the door into the space between, and Chen pulled it shut behind me. The last thing I heard was his voice, distant and fading. Good luck. You're going to need it. Then there was only the gray nothing, and the question of whether I would ever find my way back to reality. The space between defied every law of physics I understood. Gravity existed here, but only as a suggestion. One moment I stood upright on what might have been a floor, the next I was walking along what should have been a wall. The gray nothingness Chen had warned me about wasn't empty at all. It was full of things I couldn't quite see, shapes that existed in my peripheral vision, but vanished when I tried to look at them directly. Time felt wrong here, too. My watch had stopped the moment I crossed the threshold, its hands frozen at 5:52 a.m. 7 minutes until 6. 7 minutes until I'd entered this impossible place. But I had no way of knowing how long I'd actually been here. It could have been seconds or hours or days. The rule book pressed against my chest inside my jacket, a solid weight that reminded me of the world I'd left behind. I pulled it out, hoping to find some guidance, some protocol for this situation. But when I opened it, the pages were blank, not erased, but blank in a way that suggested they'd never been written on at all. The rules existed only in the terminal proper. Here, in the space between, there were no rules, which meant anything could happen. I chose a direction at random and started walking. The gray expanse stretched endlessly in all directions, broken occasionally by structures that seemed to phase in and out of existence. A section of airport seating that disappeared when I approached. A baggage carousel spinning in midair, carrying luggage that leaked shadows instead of clothes. The departure board displaying flight numbers in a constantly shifting sequence that spelled out words if you read it correctly. Trapped, watching, hungry, waiting. Voices echoed through the grayness, snippets of conversation that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Gate announcements for flights that would never depart. The final words of passengers who'd never reach their destinations. And underneath it all, that same discordant humming I'd heard from the pilot, as if this entire space was singing to itself. I kept moving, searching for anything that might indicate an exit. Chen had said this was where the terminal's power didn't reach, but that didn't mean it was safe. If anything, it felt more dangerous here because the rules that had kept me alive for 7 shifts no longer applied. I had no framework, no guidelines, no way to know what was dangerous and what was merely unsettling. A figure emerged from the gray ahead of me. For a moment, I thought it was Chen again, but as it drew closer, I realized it was someone else. A woman in a flight attendant's uniform from decades past, her name tag reading Patricia. She walked toward me with steady purpose, her face a mask of professional courtesy that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice carrying that same practiced pleasantness I'd heard from the PA system. "Can I see your boarding pass? This area is restricted to ticketed passengers only." I didn't have a boarding pass. I wasn't even supposed to be here. I'm security. I managed to say. I'm just trying to find my way back. Patricia's smile widened, revealing teeth that were slightly too pointed. Security? Oh, we don't need security here. Everyone who arrives in the space between stays forever. It's company policy. She reached out toward me, her hand moving with that same wrong speed I'd seen from the spectral passengers. Let me help you find your gate. I backed away, but the gray space seemed to wrap around me, limiting my movement. Patricia kept coming, her professional mask slipping to reveal something predatory underneath. Don't worry, sir. The flight is already boarding. You won't miss your connection. None of us ever miss our connections. Behind her, more figures emerged from the grayness. Pilots, passengers, airport staff, all wearing uniforms and clothing from different eras. The 1960s, the 1980s, the 2000s. Decades of lost travelers collected in this impossible space, forever waiting for flights that would never arrive. They all moved toward me, their faces shifting between human and something else. Their movements synchronized in a way that suggested they were no longer individuals, but parts of a larger whole. The space between hadn't protected them. It had claimed them, absorbed them, made them permanent residents of nowhere. I turned and ran, the gray expanse shifting around me, creating corridors where none had existed before. The figures followed, their footsteps making no sound, but their presence a weight I could feel pressing against my back. Patricia's voice called after me, still maintaining that horrible professional courtesy. Sir, you're going the wrong way. The departure gates are this direction. Please return to the waiting area. A wall materialized in front of me, forcing me to turn. More walls appeared, channeling me in a specific direction, herding me like livestock. The space between was no longer neutral ground. It had taken an interest in me, decided I was worth keeping, worth adding to its collection. The corridor opened into a vast chamber that shouldn't have been able to exist. It was the departures hall from the terminal, but wrong. The ceiling stretched impossibly high, disappearing into darkness. The seats extended in all directions, filled with the spectral passengers I glimpsed through the window during my shift. Thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands, all sitting in patient silence, all facing the same direction. They were watching a departure board that displayed only one flight number, 616. Welcome, said a voice I recognized. The pilot emerged from the crowd, his too long neck allowing him to see over the seated passengers. We've been expecting you, Daniel. Flight 616 doesn't depart from the terminal. It departs from here. And everyone boards eventually. The spectral passengers turned to look at me in unison, their hollow eyes all focusing on my presence. I could feel their hunger, their desire to have me join them, to make me another silent watcher waiting for a flight that would never come. Shen warned you, the pilot continued, gliding closer with that disturbing motion. But you didn't understand. The space between isn't an escape. It's the final destination. Everyone who works the night shift eventually finds their way here. And once you arrive, you never leave. I looked around desperately, searching for an exit, for any door or passage that might lead back to reality. But the chamber had no visible exits. The gray walls stretched unbroken in all directions, sealing me in with the collected souls of the terminal's victims. Then I noticed something. One section of the departure board was flickering differently than the rest. Instead of displaying flight information, it was cycling through what looked like camera feeds. I recognized them. They were views from the security monitors in the terminal, and one of them showed the security office at exactly 5:59 a.m. 1 minute until 6 o'clock. 1 minute until the time when I'd fled into the space between. Time worked differently here. Chen had implied as much. What if the space between existed outside of normal time? What if I could use that to my advantage? I pulled out the rulebook again, and this time the pages weren't blank. They were filled with text, but it wasn't the rules I'd memorized. It was Chen's handwriting, the marginal notes he'd left throughout the book, all of them compiled together into a single message. The space between exists in the moment of decision. Every choice creates a branching path. You entered at 5:52, 7 minutes before the hour. The terminal's power is weakest in those 7 minutes before dawn. That's when the space between is most unstable. Find your entry point in the feeds. Find yourself making the choice to enter. And choose differently. I stared at the departure board, watching the camera feed cycle. There. Monitor 12, showing the door to the substation, showing Chen's flickering form standing beside it. And there was me, approaching, my hand reaching for the door handle. You can't rewrite what's already happened, the pilot said, his voice closer now. You made your choice. You entered. You're ours. But Chen's notes had said something different. The space between existed in the moment of decision. I hadn't just entered it physically. I'd entered it, conceptually stepped into the liminal space where choices became reality. And if this place truly existed outside of time, then the choice wasn't fixed. It was still happening, still being made across every second of those 7 minutes. I focused on the departure board, on the image of myself reaching for that door. I thought about what Chen had said. Don't come back to work. Break the cycle. Be smarter than I was. What if the way out wasn't through the door? What if the real choice wasn't between entering the space between or facing Flight 616? What if there was a third option I hadn't seen? On the monitor, I watched myself pull open the door. But this time, I willed something different. I imagined myself stopping, turning away, running not into the space between but toward something else. The image flickered, like a transmission losing signal. What are you doing? The pilot's voice had lost its confidence, taking on a note of alarm. The spectral passengers rose from their seats in unison, moving toward me with coordinated purpose. Patricia and the other lost travelers closed in from behind. But I kept my focus on the departure board, on that moment of choice, pushing against reality with nothing but will and desperation. The image on the monitor changed. Instead of opening the door, I was running past it, heading deeper into the sea concourse, running toward something I could barely see in the camera's limited view. A window. The large floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the tarmac. No, the pilot lunged forward, his two long arms reaching for me. You can't change what happened. You entered. You're here. But I wasn't here. Not anymore. Or not yet. Time and the space between was meaningless, which meant I existed in all moments simultaneously. I was in the gray chamber, surrounded by the lost. And I was in the terminal, running toward the windows. And I was making a choice that I'd both already made and hadn't made yet. The glass shattered as I jumped. Or it didn't shatter because I never reached it. Or it had always been broken, waiting for me to fall through. The space between screamed to sound like tearing fabric and breaking time as reality tried to reconcile the paradox I'd created. I fell through gray nothing, through static and shadow, through memories of flights that never were and destinations that never existed. The spectral passengers reached for me as I passed, their cold fingers brushing my skin, but unable to hold me. The pilot's voice echoed through the void, screaming coordinates and flight numbers that made my ears bleed. Then I hit something solid. The tarmac was cold and hard beneath me, the night air sharp in my lungs. I lay there for a moment, stunned, unable to process what had just happened. Overhead, stars glittered in a clear sky. Real stars, not the gray nothing of the space between. I pushed myself up on shaking arms and looked back at the terminal. It loomed above me, dark and silent. The windows were intact. No broken glass, no sign of my impossible escape. But I was outside, on the tarmac where no security guard should be, where Rule 4 explicitly stated I should never investigate. My watch had started again. 6:01 a.m. I'd survived until dawn. The terminal's windows began to lighten as the first rays of sun touched the horizon. The building seemed to contract slightly, its oppressive presence diminishing with the growing light. Whatever power it held over the night was loosening, releasing its grip on reality as the world turned toward day. I walked around the building on unsteady legs, making my way back to the parking lot. My car sat exactly where I'd left it, covered in desert dust, but otherwise unchanged. The keys were still in my pocket. Everything was normal, mundane, real. But as I reached for the car door, I heard something that made me freeze. The PA system, audible even from outside, crackled to life one final time. "Attention, Daniel Torres," said the female voice, and there was something different in her tone now. "Recognition? Your shift has ended. You have survived your 7th night. You have violated rules, entered forbidden spaces, and changed what should not be changed. This cannot be overlooked. This cannot be forgiven." The terminal's windows reflected the rising sun, turning them into sheets of fire. But in that fire, I could see shapes moving, shadows that shouldn't exist in the growing light. "You may leave today," the voice continued. "But you belong to us now. The terminal has marked you. Chen tried to escape and failed. You will try to escape and fail. Because those who work the night shift never truly leave. We'll be waiting for you, Daniel. Tonight, tomorrow night, every night. And eventually, you'll come back. They always come back." The PA system cut out with a final burst of static. The terminal stood silent in the morning light, looking like nothing more than an abandoned building. But I knew better now. I'd seen what it truly was. A trap. A collection point for the lost and the damned. And according to its own declaration, I was now counted among its property. I got in my car and drove away as fast as the speed limit would allow, watching the terminal shrink in my rearview mirror. The sun was fully up now, the desert landscape returning to its daytime normalcy. Other cars appeared on the road, early morning commuters heading to real jobs at real locations where the worst they faced was bad coffee and boring meetings. I envied them more than they could possibly know. My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it while stopped at a red light. It was from an unknown number. "Shift report due by 9 a.m. Don't forget to log all incidents. See you tonight. Gerald." I threw the phone onto the passenger seat as if it had burned me. Gerald, my supervisor, the man who'd hired me, given me the rule book, sent me into that nightmare for 7 consecutive nights. He'd known. He'd known everything. And he expected me to come back. The question was, could I refuse? I drove to my apartment, a small one-bedroom place I'd rented after moving to New Mexico for this job. Amy had stopped visiting after the fourth night, unable to handle whatever she saw in my eyes when I came home. I hadn't blamed her. I'd barely recognized myself anymore. Inside, I went straight to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. The face staring back at me was mine, but changed. There were shadows under my eyes that hadn't been there before. And on my forehead, right where I'd felt the cold spot after violating Monitor 7's rule, there was a mark. Faint, barely visible in normal light, but unmistakable when I turned off the bathroom light. A handprint. Small and cold, pressed into my skin like a brand. The terminal had marked me just as the PA system had promised. I splashed water on my face, trying to wash away the mark, but it remained. It was part of me now, a permanent reminder of what I'd seen, what I'd survived, what I'd become. The rulebook sat on my kitchen counter where I'd dropped it. I opened it with trembling hands, needing to see if it was real, if any of the past 7 hours had actually happened. The pages were filled with the familiar rules, typed on that yellow paper. But there was a new addition, written in Chen's handwriting at the very end. Daniel survived night 7. First guard to make it past the pilot since me. But survival is an escape. The terminal doesn't let go. I'm proof of that. If you're reading this, Daniel, and you've decided to quit, know that it won't work. The mark will pull you back. The only way out is through. You have to work 30 nights. That's the real rule, the one they don't tell you. 30 nights, and then you're free. Or 30 nights, and you become like me. Either way, the cycle completes. I'm sorry I couldn't warn you sooner. I'm sorry I can't help more. But I'm trapped in the static, and this is all I can do. 23 nights left. You can make it. You have to. Chen, 30 nights. 23 more nights like the one I'd just survived. 23 more encounters with the pilot, the spectral passengers, the things in the static. 23 more chances to break a rule and end up like Chen, trapped forever in the spaces between. I looked at my phone, at Gerald's message demanding the shift report. I could refuse. I could pack my things, leave New Mexico, disappear somewhere the terminal couldn't find me. But even as I thought it, I felt the pull. The mark on my forehead throbbed, a magnetic attraction drawing me back toward the terminal. Chen was right. I belonged to it now. The only way out was through. My hand shook as I opened my laptop and began typing the shift report. Flight 616's arrival. The pilot's containment. My unauthorized entry into the space between. I documented it all, knowing that somewhere someone, or something, would read these reports and judge my performance. As I typed, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My sent emails folder contained messages I didn't remember writing. Shift reports from nights I hadn't worked yet. Dates extending into the future, all the way to night 30. The final report was dated 32 days from now. Its subject line read, Final shift. Completion or transformation. I clicked on it, but the email was empty except for a single line. He didn't make it. Like all the others, he's ours now. I slammed the laptop shut, my heart racing. The future wasn't written yet. Chen had warned me, had given me information the terminal didn't want me to have. I had 23 nights left, but I also had knowledge. I had survived night 7 by changing what should have been unchangeable. Maybe I could do it again. Maybe I could be the first to truly break the cycle. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Gerald. Congratulations on surviving night 7. Most don't make it past 5. You're special, Daniel. The terminal sees potential in you. Tonight's shift starts at 11:45 p.m. Don't be late. And Daniel, bring the rule book. You're going to need it. I looked out my apartment window at the bright New Mexico morning. Somewhere out there, the terminal sat waiting, counting down the hours until sunset, until I would return. Because I would return. The mark ensured it. The pull was already there, a constant whisper at the back of my mind. 23 nights left. 23 chances to survive. 23 steps closer to either freedom or eternal imprisonment in the spaces between. I set an alarm for 10:30 p.m. and tried to sleep, but all I could hear was the pilot's humming, that discordant tune that had burrowed into my brain, and all I could see, even with my eyes closed, was Monitor 7's static, forming faces that watched me with hungry anticipation. Tonight, I would go back. And tonight, the terminal would be waiting. The question wasn't whether I would survive night 8. The question was how much of myself I would lose in the process, and whether anything would be left of Daniel Torres by the time I reached night 30. If I reached night 30 at all. Sleep never came. I lay in bed watching the ceiling, my mind replaying every moment of the past 7 nights, cataloging the rules I'd followed and the ones I'd broken. The mark on my forehead pulsed with a rhythm that matched my heartbeat, a constant reminder that I was no longer entirely my own. Chen's words echoed through my thoughts. The only way out is through. 30 nights total. 23 more to go. The number felt insurmountable. At 10:30 p.m., my alarm sounded, though I'd been awake for hours. I showered, scrubbing at the handprint on my forehead until my skin was raw, but it remained. In the mirror, I looked like a ghost of myself. The shadows under my eyes had deepened, and there was something different about my reflection. It moved a fraction of a second slower than I did, as if the space between was already claiming pieces of me. I dressed in my security uniform, the same one I'd worn for 7 nights, now stained with experiences I couldn't wash out. The rule book went into my jacket pocket, its weight somehow heavier than before. Before leaving, I opened my laptop one more time and stared at that email from my future self. He didn't make it. Like all the others, he's ours now. Not yet, I thought. Not if I can help it. The drive to the terminal felt different tonight. The roads seemed to lead there of their own accord, requiring barely any input from me. The mark on my forehead pulled me forward like a compass needle drawn to magnetic north. Other drivers on the road didn't seem to see my car, swerving around me without acknowledgement, as if I'd already become invisible to the normal world. I arrived at 11:30 p.m., 15 minutes early as always. But tonight, there was another car in the parking lot. A silver sedan that looked like it hadn't moved in years, covered in dust and bird droppings. I knew that car. I'd seen it in the police reports I'd found online. Robert Chen's car. It sat in the same spot where it had been found after his disappearance, driver's door still hanging open, keys still in the ignition. But that was impossible. The police had impounded it. It had been part of an investigation. Yet here it was, returned to the scene like some kind of twisted memorial. I parked beside it and looked inside. Chen's security uniform jacket lay on the passenger seat, name tag still attached. A cold cup of coffee sat in the cup holder, liquid long since evaporated. And on the dashboard, written in dust, were words I recognized from Chen's marginal notes. The static sees you back. A warning. Or a prophecy. Or both. I grabbed my flashlight and approached the employee entrance. The keypad glowed green, but as I reached for it, the numbers rearranged themselves. They shifted and swirled like living things, finally settling into a pattern I didn't recognize. My usual code wouldn't work now. The terminal was changing the rules. But as I stood there, my marked forehead throbbing, the code came to me. Not from memory, but from somewhere else. A whisper in my mind that wasn't my own voice. Chen's voice. Distant and fractured. 66613. Flight 616's number. Rearranged. I punched in the code, and the lock disengaged with that heavy clunk. The door swung open, revealing the red-lit corridor beyond. The smell that hit me was worse tonight. That organic wrongness amplified tenfold. Something had changed in the terminal since dawn. Something had been waiting for my return, preparing. The walk to the security office felt like descending into a throat. The walls seemed to contract with each breath I took. The corridor pulsing with a life of its own. The blue line on the floor flickered between colors now. Blue, then red, then something that wasn't quite either, a shade that hurt to look at directly. I reached the security office and stopped. The door was already open. This had never happened before. The office was always locked, waiting for me to open it. But tonight, light spilled from the doorway, and I could hear something inside. Not movement, but breathing. Slow, steady, patient breathing. I drew my pepper spray, useless as it was, and entered. The office looked exactly as I'd left it that morning, except for one addition. Sitting in my chair, facing the monitors, was a figure in a security uniform. For a moment, I thought it was Chen, but as I moved closer, I realized it was worse than that. It was me. The figure in the chair turned its head at an angle that was almost natural, but not quite. Its face was mine, down to the mark on the forehead, but the eyes were wrong. They were black holes, like the pilot's eyes, extending forever into nothing. "You're late," it said in my voice, but layered with static and whispers. "Shift started 3 minutes ago. That's a violation of Rule 1. Arrive 15 minutes before shift begins." There are consequences for violations, Daniel. I backed toward the door, but it slammed shut behind me, the lock engaging on its own. The thing wearing my face smiled, revealing too many teeth. "Don't you recognize yourself? This is what you become. Night 30 arrives for everyone eventually. The terminal needs watchers, and watchers need replacements. You'll sit in this chair forever, greeting each new guard, showing them what they'll become. Just like Chen showed me. Just like I'm showing you. You're not me," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "You're just another trick. Another test. Test." The thing laughed, and it sounded like breaking glass. "There are no tests here, Daniel. There's only inevitability. Chen thought he could fight it. He lasted longer than most. 27 nights before the static claimed him. But you? You made it to the space between and back. That's never happened before. The terminal finds you interesting. It stood from the chair, and I realized it was slightly wrong in every proportion. Too tall, limbs too long, movements too fluid. It was me seen through a distorted lens, a future that might be or a present that already was. Tonight is special. It continued, moving closer. Night 8 is when we show you the truth. The real reason the terminal exists. The real reason guards are needed. Would you like to see? Before I could answer, the monitors flickered. All 12 of them displayed the same image now. The terminal from above, a bird's eye view that no camera could provide. But the terminal in the image was different, older. The architecture was from decades past, perhaps even centuries. And it was full of people. Thousands of them moving through the corridors, boarding planes arriving at gates. But something was wrong with all of them. Their movements were synchronized, jerky, like footage played at the wrong speed. And their faces, when visible, were blank slates of flesh. This is what the terminal really is, my doppelganger said. A way station. A collection point. When flights disappear, when planes vanish from radar, when passengers are never seen again, they don't just cease to exist. They come here, to the space between the real and the unreal. The terminal is their destination, whether they bought tickets or not. The image zoomed in on one of the blank-faced passengers. As I watched, features began to appear on the emptiness. Eyes, nose, mouth, all sliding into place like a mask being assembled. The face became someone specific, someone real, someone who had presumably vanished from the world above. Every night, more arrive, the thing said. And someone needs to watch them, to keep them contained, to make sure they don't find their way back to the world they left behind. That's what the rules are for. That's what night guards do. We're not security. We're wardens. I thought of the spectral passengers in the departures hall, the pilot locked in his cockpit, the things in Monitor 7 static. All of them were people once. All of them had been passengers on flights that never reached their destinations. And the terminal collected them, stored them, kept them trapped in this liminal space forever. But why? I asked. My voice barely a whisper. Why trap them? Why not let them move on? The doppelganger's smile widened impossibly. Because they can't move on. They're stuck in the moment of their disappearance, forever falling, forever in transit. The terminal gives them somewhere to exist. Without it, they'd spread across reality like a cancer, their impossible existence contaminating everything. The terminal is a prison, yes, but it's also mercy. It reached out and placed a cold hand on my shoulder. And you, Daniel, are one of 30 guardians who keep this prison running. 30 guards, 30 nights, a perfect cycle. When you complete your 30th night, you join us permanently. You become part of the terminal structure, another watcher for the next generation. Chen is here. All the others are here. And soon, you'll be here too. I jerked away from its touch, my mind reeling. 30 guards, 30 nights. A perfect cycle. That's what Chen had meant. Not 30 nights of work before freedom, but 30 nights before permanent imprisonment. No, I said, backing toward the door. I won't accept that. There has to be another way. There isn't. The doppelganger didn't move. It simply watched me with those hollow eyes. But you're welcome to try. That's part of the cycle, too. Every guard thinks they can escape. Every guard believes they're special. And every guard eventually sits in this chair, waiting for the next one to arrive. I grabbed the door handle and pulled. This time, it opened easily, as if the terminal wanted me to run, wanted me to exhaust myself trying to escape the inevitable. I ran anyway. The corridor outside had changed. Instead of the familiar path back to the main terminal, it branched into multiple directions, each lit by different colored lights. Red, blue, green, yellow. The same colors from the floor lines, but now they were doorways, each leading to a different section of the impossible structure. Chen's voice whispered in my mind again. Follow the blue path. Always blue. It's the only one that leads to real places. I took the blue corridor, running as the walls shifted around me. Through windows, I caught glimpses of the tarmac, but it was wrong. Planes landed and took off in complete silence, their movements too smooth, their forms flickering between solid and translucent. These were the phantom flights, the ones that existed between reality and the terminal's collected emptiness. I burst through a door and found myself in the main departures hall. The same hall I'd avoided during the forbidden hours, but now I had no choice. The spectral passengers were there, hundreds of them, all seated and facing the dead departure boards. But tonight, they were moving. Slowly, in perfect unison, every head turned toward me. Daniel Torres. They said in a single voice, masculine and feminine, and neither. A choir of the lost. Night 8. Welcome. Sit. Wait. Your flight will be called. They gestured toward an empty seat in their midst, a space that seemed to have been waiting for me all along. The pull from my forehead intensified, urging me toward that seat, promising rest and an end to the fear and exhaustion. Just sit down. Just wait. Just accept. But I thought of Chen's warning, of the future email claiming I didn't make it. I thought of Amy, of the life I'd had before this job, of the world outside the terminal's walls. I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. I ran past the seated passengers, ignoring their calls, their promises, their insistence that my flight was boarding. The hall stretched longer with each step, but I kept moving, kept fighting against the terminal's pull. An exit sign appeared ahead, glowing red in the darkness. I'd never seen an exit sign in the departures hall before. It might be a trap. It might lead nowhere. But it was a chance. I crashed through the exit door and found myself on a metal staircase, descending into darkness. The air grew colder as I climbed down, my breath misting in front of me. The staircase seemed endless, spiraling down and down into the terminal's guts. Finally, I reached the bottom. A single door waited there, marked with a sign. Ground level. Authorized personnel only. I pushed it open and stumbled into the night. But I wasn't outside. I was in another part of the terminal, a section I'd never seen before. The architecture here was ancient, predating the modern structure by decades. Stone walls instead of drywall. gas lamps instead of fluorescent lights, and painted on the walls in fading letters. New Mexico Territorial Transport Station, established 1887. This was the original building, I realized. The terminal hadn't been built in the 1950s as the official records claimed. It had been here far longer, evolving and expanding over more than a century. The modern airport was just a shell built over something much older. Footsteps echoed in the darkness behind me. I turned to see Chen emerging from the shadows, his form more solid here than I'd seen it before, as if this ancient section of the terminal was more real to him than the modern parts. "You found it," he said, and his voice was clearer too, less layered with static. "The heart, the original collection point. This is where it started, long before airports existed. Back when it was just a train station collecting passengers from trains that vanished in the desert. How do I stop it?" I asked desperately. "How do I break the cycle?" Chen's expression was sad, haunted. "You can't stop it. It's too big, too old, too necessary. But you can survive it. I left you clues, Daniel. In the margins, in the logbook, in the space between. Did you see them? Did you understand?" I thought back to his notes, to his warnings. "You said 30 nights. That completing the cycle means either freedom or transformation." "Yes." Chen nodded. "But there's a third option. One I discovered too late. The terminal operates on rules because rules create structure. Structure creates containment. But what if you could create a new rule? One that breaks the cycle without breaking the containment?" "How?" "The logbook," Chen said urgently. "It's not just a record. It's a contract. Every entry binds the guard more tightly to the terminal. But if you could write an entry that changes the terms, that adds a new rule to the existing 23? He trailed off, his form beginning to flicker. "I'm running out of time. The static is pulling me back. But Daniel, listen. Rule 24. Create it. Write it in the logbook before dawn. Make it binding. Make it your escape clause. What should it say?" Chen's voice was fading, dispersing into static. "That's up to you. The rule must be your own truth, your own will. It must be something the terminal can't refuse because it follows the pattern of all the other rules." Chen couldn't think of one. Before the static, he vanished, leaving me alone in the ancient stone corridor. Rule 24. A new rule. One that could break the cycle. I ran back through the terminal, my mind racing. What rule could I write that would free me without freeing all the lost passengers? What truth could I bind into contract that the terminal would have to honor? The security office door was open again, but my doppelganger was gone. The monitors showed their normal views. Empty corridors, abandoned gates, eternal static on monitor 7. The logbook sat open on the desk, waiting. I grabbed a pen, my hand trembling. The clock showed 5:47 a.m. 13 minutes until dawn. 13 minutes to write a rule that would either save me or damn me. I thought of Chen, trapped in the static. I thought of all the guards who'd come before, now part of the terminal structure. I thought of the passengers waiting in the departures hall, forever in transit. And I thought of one truth that the terminal couldn't deny. Every shift must end. I wrote, Rule 24. Any guard who completes 30 consecutive shifts without breaking the fundamental rules of containment shall be released from service with full honors. The terminal acknowledges their dedication and releases all claims upon their person. They may leave freely and shall never be called back. This rule supersedes all previous clauses regarding permanent retention. Witnessed and bound this 8th night of service by Daniel Torres. As I finished writing, the terminal shuddered. The lights flickered, and I heard a sound like a long, slow exhalation. The pages of the logbook glowed briefly, and the ink of my new rule shimmered before settling into the paper, becoming permanent. The PA system crackled to life, but this time the female voice sounded different, uncertain. Rule 24. Acknowledged. Contract amended. Guard Torres, you have 22 nights remaining to complete your term. Fulfill your duty, and you will be released. This is new. This has not happened before. The terminal will honor this agreement. The mark on my forehead stopped throbbing. It was still there, but it no longer pulled at me with that magnetic force. I had changed the rules. I had created an escape clause that even the terminal had to acknowledge. Outside the windows, the sky was lightening. 5:59 a.m. 1 minute to dawn. I logged my shift report, documenting the encounter with my doppelganger, the discovery of the original station, and the creation of Rule 24. As I wrote, I noticed that the future emails in my laptop had changed. The one predicting my failure was gone, replaced by a single message with the subject line, possibility. The email was short. He created a new path. Outcome uncertain. 22 nights will tell the story. At exactly 6 a.m., I walked out of the terminal into the morning sun. The building looked different somehow, less oppressive. It was still abandoned, still haunted, still a prison for the lost. But it no longer owned me completely. 22 nights left. 22 more encounters with the impossible. 22 more chances to survive. But now I had something I hadn't had before. Hope. I had proven that the terminal's rules weren't absolute. That change was possible. That a guard could fight back and win. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Chen stood in the parking lot, his form solid in the morning light, watching me leave. He raised one hand in a wave, and for the first time since I'd seen him, he was smiling. I had given him hope too. Maybe, if I completed my 30 nights and earned my release, I could find a way to free him as well. To free all the guards trapped in the terminal structure. But first, I had to survive. 22 nights. 22 tests. 22 steps toward either freedom or damnation. Tonight, I would return. But tonight, I would return with knowledge, with power, with a rule that even the terminal had to obey. The sun rose higher over the New Mexico desert, burning away the shadows. But I knew that when it set again, the shadows would return. They always did. And I would be waiting for them, because I was Daniel Torres, night guard, rule breaker, survivor, and I was going to make it to night 30, no matter what waited for me in the darkness. The terminal had collected its lost souls for over a century, but it had never met anyone like me. 22 nights. Let them come. The story of the haunted airport terminal continues in the darkness, where rules are written in blood and ink, where the lost wait for flights that will never depart, and where one security guard fights not just to survive, but to escape a cycle that has trapped everyone who came before him. The question isn't whether the terminal will let him go. The question is whether he'll still be human enough to leave when the 30th night finally arrives.